I've been waiting at my door for something incredible. Waiting there just to be known, to beat the
welcome everyone. I'm Leonard Witt, and we're running this as part of the Sandwich Climate Action Coalition. And there's about 60 members in the coalition, and the steering committee includes me, Catherine Thorndike, who's acting as kind of the co-host here, and Peggy Longley. Introduce our two panelists tonight, and they're our speakers. And I had asked them when I saw the Biden thing was, that he was now in the administration, and he was really moving forward with the $1 trillion, but a lot of that money is going to go to climate issues. So my thing was, what can we expect from the Biden administration in the struggle to reverse global warming? How does that translate to New Hampshire? And then finally, what does all that mean for local activists like ourselves in Sandwich and over in Plymouth and Tamworth and all the other surrounding towns? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the two of you, and I don't know if which one of you would like to start, but take it away.
I think, well, thank you, Len, and we're really happy to be here. I think probably the best way to start, and I talked to Brianna about this, was sort of the national, and then get down to the sort of local, and then we can open it up for discussion and questions. That's what we thought maybe would be the best approach.
Whatever works for you, works for us.
So what I want to talk about was sort of, let's revisit a bit where we were back in November. And I think what's important to realize is that, during the campaign, climate issues were talked about in the presidential campaign and put forward as a platform more than any other time. No presidential candidate had put that much time and messaging into climate as the Biden-Harris ticket did. And as a result, I think people really, built an expectation that once this administration took office, and they certainly talked about what they would do around these areas in climate, rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement, making investments in clean energy. But it was so central, I think, to their messaging. And actually, voters, when you looked at post-election polling, the support for climate action and the reasons that people voted for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris had a lot to do with climate, certainly compared to past elections and that sort of research and polling. So that's really important. So there was a mandate for action that was built during the campaign. And then we all know, I think we should all know, that personnel is policy. And so as the administration took office, bringing in the climate team, which is, John Kerry is now, has the portfolio of the international portfolio in terms of the climate envoy. You have Gina McCarthy, who's running the climate operation out of the White House. You have, on the economic side, you have a whole team that is involved in climate policy. On the national security side, you have a team that is involved in climate policy. Our own Jake Sullivan, who I think some of you know, is now the National Security Advisor. We used to see him around Portsmouth a lot. Now we don't, because he's down in DC. But the point of this is that during the campaign, and certainly following through with the populating the administration with personnel, this all of government approach really has taken hold. Pete Buttigieg at transportation, Jennifer Granholm at energy. These are all part of the broad climate team. And you're seeing that now with the rollout of the American Jobs Plan, which we'll talk about. And then remember, there were day one actions that President Biden took: rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement, undoing environmental and health rollbacks that had occurred during the Trump administration, putting the stop to the Keystone XL pipeline after it had been revived, stopped during the the Obama administration, revived during the Trump administration, now stopped again. halted drilling in the Arctic Refuge, which is certainly something at the end of the Trump administration. They were really trying to rush through some regulations to get that in place before the Biden administration took office. That was not successful. At the end of January, there was a climate day at the White House where the National Climate Task Force was unveiled. They talked about centering environmental justice, the government leading by example. Remember, the federal government has huge purchasing power. And so when procurement of all the many things the government buys, particularly the federal government buys, when that power is put to the place, put in the place of climate and looking at things through a climate lens around procurement, that's a big deal. Fossil fuel leasing pause, no drilling on federal lands. And centering science. That's something we hadn't seen for a while because the previous administration had really taken a vacation on these issues for 4 years. The whole frame of Build Back Better, which is very broad, and we'll get into that, I'm certainly sure, during the discussion. And just this week, what's going to happen with the Earth Day Leaders Summit on the 22nd and 23rd, where 40 international leaders are going to be gathering at the White House. I think what you'll see on Wednesday and Thursday is putting some meat on the fact that we have rejoined the Paris Climate Agreement. What I mean by that is, you know, each nation, when that happened 6 years ago, put forward their goal. And our goal needs to be even more ambitious. Obviously, I think we all understand that than it was 4 years ago because we've lost time. The world has lost time. So you'll see that very aggressive goal, I think, unveiled this week at the White House. And this is in advance of the COP26, the Congress of the Parties UN conference that's going to occur in Glasgow, Scotland in November. And this is the time, you know, this is supposed to happen last year, but obviously given our world, it did not. This is the time 5 years on, or now it's 6 years on, from the Paris Agreement where nations are really supposed to up their ambition. So this kind of, you know, what's going to happen later this week at the White House fits into that. But this is a really important gathering at the end of the year in Scotland. And so this is building towards that. More recently, as Len had talked about, we have the American Jobs Plan, the infrastructure plan that has been unveiled. And this is really where I think, and I think that people are understanding this, and I think the messaging is I think getting to be successful, is that we have to think about infrastructure in a very different way, in a broader way than people are usually thinking about it in terms of roads and bridges. Yeah, those are things that are really important. But clean energy, research and development, those kinds of investments that are going to create new products and new jobs, that's really important. Transportation, a broadband, because I know, you know, Len had mentioned to me before we all started that you guys up there, and I have certainly, I'm aware of this, you really need that kind of infrastructure, not only for meetings like this, but, you know, economic development opportunities. You got to have it. So these are all coming. Now we're talking about a $2.1 trillion package. And we know that there are discussions going on in the White House even today with the GOP side of the aisle to see if there can be any common ground found. We know from the recovery bill that there wasn't any common ground found there, and that was accomplished through reconciliation, meaning they needed 51 votes, not 60. And I think that, you know, there should be a effort to see if, you know, any common ground can be found. But if it can't, I certainly am an advocate for just really making sure that we seize this opportunity and do something for the American people that is really needed and really has broad support, even amongst Republicans in the country. And it's really interesting how it may not have as broad a support politically in those two houses of Congress at Washington, D.C., but it certainly has broad appeal throughout the nation, and particularly among Republicans as well. So it'll be really interesting to see how that happens. You know, we're talking now how we're going to finance it. We're talking about, you know, the corporate income tax or taxes and where they're going to be. So that's all going to be sorted out over the next couple of months. And the goal is to have a very significant plan, infrastructure plan, on the president's desk by July 4th. So if we can, hope we can get there. Our delegation here in New Hampshire certainly is in strong support of that. But there's a lot we can talk about in terms of what's in that package. But what I'll do now is turn it over to Brianna to talk about, you know, what's our scene here in New Hampshire. It's a little different in my view. I think the federal government is moving ahead aggressively with this administration. But we have a little bit more challenge here in New Hampshire that we have to work with.
Awesome, thanks, Rob. I will try to share my screen and we'll see. Oh, I think it's gonna work. How's that?
Good.
Yay, okay,
It's there.
fantastic. Great, yes, so thank you so much for having me tonight. It's great to be here. Awesome opportunity to partner up with Rob, and I'm looking forward to the discussion and questions after. So as Rob mentioned, I'm just going to take sort of what he went over at the broad federal level and sort of dial it down a little bit towards what's currently going on in New Hampshire and how some of the federal items that are in progress may affect us just based on some things that are going on here. So there's probably going to be a little bit of overlap, and I hope that this is helpful. So the first thing that I wanted to touch upon is energy efficiency. And this is a big topic. I broke out my segment according to some broader topics just to keep everything organized. And the energy efficiency figures very largely in the American Jobs Plan, as Rob had mentioned. Weatherization in particular is mentioned quite frequently. There's a huge goal to weatherize millions of buildings across the country. And in New Hampshire, we currently are having quite a problem with our energy efficiency programs. So I just pulled 2 news articles from the last, I believe, week and a half, just to illustrate just how important and really how timely this is. New Hampshire has a statewide energy efficiency plan, and that is revised every 3 years. So our plan ended in 2020, the last iteration of the plan. And we had a new one that was supposed to be enacted in 2021 until 2023. We went through an exhaustive stakeholder process all through 2020, all throughout the pandemic. Everybody signed on to the plan that was a stakeholder, and the PUC has not approved that plan yet. They were supposed to do it by the end of the year. They gave themselves an extension until, I believe, the end of February. And we still have not seen any approval of that plan. So what you're seeing now is the utilities starting to run out of funding. And this has actually caused some significant problems for some ongoing projects like Weatherize Concord, which Rob is very familiar with. And it's really causing a lot of issues with the overall industry, whereas people aren't able to get committed funding. So projects are being paused, budgets are running out, and it's causing quite a problem for the industry. Now, I mentioned this, I mentioned the stalling of the projects, but I think it's really important in the context of the American Jobs Plan and what we might see with some federal stimulus and money flowing into New Hampshire is we're really not prepared with the energy efficiency industry to take that funding and really get that out. Right now, what we're seeing are a lot of contractors and clean energy, energy efficiency providers who, because they don't have the stability of the new energy efficiency plan budgets, they're not hiring new staff, they're not purchasing new equipment, they're not scaling up for what was supposed to be a very ambitious 3-year energy efficiency plan with very ambitious budgets. So you're seeing the industry really starting to fall behind. And I think it's important to mention, because if we get significant funding coming into the state to weatherize buildings, to increase our energy efficiency, we really are not prepared for that at the moment. And we're really falling behind the rest of New England, who all the other New England states are really ramping up their energy efficiency efforts. So that was the first big topic that I wanted to touch upon. The next are just a few topics on clean energy funding. So right now there is a bill at the legislature that is trying to fix a wording change to our renewable energy fund. So what we're seeing right now is there's actually money in the renewable energy fund that the Public Utilities Commission is not able to access, because a small wording change 2 years ago that is now being implemented means that the fund was changed from continually appropriated to non-lapsing. So you have money in this fund that the PUC is not able to use, and therefore they're closing rebate programs. The residential solar rebate program is closed. They're not accepting any applications, even though there is money available in the fund. So I just mentioned that as a heads up that we're really struggling here with managing money in this state. Another example is the $5 million Clean Energy Fund that was created by the Eversource divestiture about 4 years ago. That money is sitting unspent. There's been a lot of debate over how best to use that money. And as a result, we haven't been able to come to a consensus, and it's money that's sitting. And I think you'll start to see a pattern of money that is available but is sitting. And what Rob mentioned is a huge infrastructure package that could really help spur our clean energy and energy efficiency industries here. New Hampshire isn't on a great track record right now of spending money that we have. And then I did just want to mention, you've probably heard for the past few years now, efforts to expand net metering, so to allow larger solar and hydro projects to be able to be built and to net meter. There is an effort ongoing this year to try and expand that. It's right now, it's called SB 109. So we are continuing to monitor that. And then I did want to mention offshore wind. So the Biden administration has released a new goal for offshore wind to set, or really to kickstart a new industry, especially up here in New England. You may have heard there's a lot of procurements going on from a lot of our neighboring states, Maine, Massachusetts, New York, and New Jersey, even Connecticut and Rhode Island are really moving forward on offshore wind. There's a lot of investments going into ports. We're going to need a lot of ports to serve as staging areas for these projects. These are massive, massive infrastructure projects. And if New Hampshire can really get into gear here, we might be able to see some industry development here, and maybe down the line, some potential development off of our coast. We are still currently bogged down in a Bureau of Ocean Energy Management Renewable Energy Task Force that has not met since December of 2019. We don't know why. We don't know why that task force has not reconvened. That is a joint effort between New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Maine. And until we can get that back on track, we are still about 5 to 10 years from seeing any sort of projects in the water. But the goal released from the Biden administration is at least a positive signal that this is an industry that they are taking seriously. And then electric vehicles and transportation also features quite largely in the American Jobs Plan. As I mentioned before, New Hampshire's is having this issue of not spending money that we have. There is a Volkswagen settlement fund, 15% of which Governor Sununu did direct towards electric vehicle supply equipment, and all of that remains unspent. It's about $4.6 million. We haven't spent a dime of it in about 4 years now. And there's a new goal for charging stations across the country. I believe it was about 500,000, if my memory serves me correctly. So that's a huge number, and we really do need all of those charging stations if we are going to move our fleet from internal combustion over to electric. So that's a huge one that I would keep your eye on. And I believe those were the big topics that I had. Go ahead and stop sharing. Great.
So Rob and Brianna, so we open up to questions, or you still have some more information you'd like to share?
Well, I just want to make a couple of quick points to amplify what Brianna had said. And we're talking, and just to give people a sense of the scale and the money we're talking about in terms of investments. So in the offshore wind aspect, the administration, as Brianna had mentioned, their goal is to deploy 30 gigawatts. That's 30,000 megawatts of offshore wind by 2030. And we see that the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management actually has new leadership with Amanda Lefton that was appointed by President Biden not long ago. And soon after that appointment, the stalled approval of the Vineyard Wind project, which really will be the first utility scale wind project in our waters. You're talking about an 800 megawatt project that will power 400,000 homes, just to give you a sense of that. So this is a very aggressive move, and we need to be part of this. We cannot be left behind. It's the biggest lever we have in New England to confront the climate crisis, but it's also going to create huge amount of jobs. Just to give you a real quick scale too, it's not just New England. The supply chain is huge. I was listening to a program today where they pointed out that, you know, engines, the GE engines are made for these turbines are made in Illinois. The essentially floating hotel that is needed to put these things in the water is going to be made in Mississippi. So, you know, this is all over the country in terms of the supply chain. That's really important. On the EV infrastructure, you're talking about $174 billion proposed investment. And I'm really hoping that these monies will be coming to states via grants. So I'm really hoping that we take advantage of that, because we desperately need that infrastructure. So I just wanted to give a little more numbers and color on some of these federal things.
So let me just ask you one question. You said 800 megawatts would take care of 400,000 homes. Is that what?
That's correct.
But then you said that their bigger plan is 30,000 megawatts.
That's correct. Well, 30 gigawatts. So, you know, look at it this way too. We all exist in this New England grid, all 6 states.
Yeah.
The New England grid is about 30 gigawatts of generation for all of us. So just that gives you some comparison, but that is the goal: 30 gigawatts, 30,000 megawatts by 2030 of offshore wind deployment.
And just to put that in perspective, right now there are 30 megawatts, and that is the Block Island wind project. So that's the only wind project offshore right now.
Yeah, I just want to ask one more quick question about the wind, and then we'll open up to other people. So, because people on the other side said, look, these wind turbines are going to be good for 20 years, or I don't know what the lifespan is. Then what when you have all these wind turbines out in the middle of the sea? Has anybody addressed that, thought about it, so that when people come back and ask us that question, we have an answer for it?
Well, I can take a stab, Rob, and then feel free to chime in. This industry is very mature over in Europe. They have many offshore wind farms that are powering their grid, and they have been at this much longer than we have. So they have actually gone through and decommissioned and recommissioned wind farms. So there are definitely ways to go out there and repower or to take them down. It's definitely an option. I think as our industry here grows and develops, there will be, we're definitely going to go through a period of, trial and error. Maybe we'll find, okay, maybe we'll let this farm, go through its life, and then maybe we found a better area that we want to put turbines in next. There's going to be a lot of options, but I think what we need to remember is with any energy infrastructure, there is a limited lifespan, even with fossil-based energy infrastructure. It's always going to come to an end. We're always going to need to be looking at other options and what's down the future. But there's definitely options to repower wind farms after their initial life.
Well,
And-
yeah, just real quick to add on, I mean, even the technology is moving so rapidly. So what you're seeing now is each turbine becoming more and more powerful. You're talking about each turbine, it used to be like an 8 megawatt turbine by itself was something unimaginable. Now we're talking about almost twice that per turbine. So 14, 15 megawatts for each one, which allows, actually what it does is it allows the deployment of actual less turbines, wind farms that take up the space. So you're talking about for Vineyard Wind, these turbines are going to be a mile apart, and that is in part to make sure that migration patterns of wildlife is maintained, and that the fishing fleet is maintained and so forth. But as with anything, the technology that we foresee 10 years from now, we can't foresee, and we assume that's going to get more efficient, and there are things that we can't even imagine in terms of how we're going to power ourselves. So we have to be ready to be able to take advantage of that, and everything does have a life cycle, as Brianna said.
Okay, sorry, one more question, everyone. So Brianna had talked about 3 different areas, but she talked about energy efficiency falling behind because they're not getting a report done, money not being spent, the Volkswagen money just kind of sitting there. And who is to blame? That's the first question for this. And secondly, this is what we're all here for. What can we do? I mean, if there's somebody, if all this money's not being spent and it's sitting there, and there's this big future pocket of money, and they're not going to give it to somebody who doesn't know how to use money. People don't give money to people who don't know how to use money. And so if we don't start getting into this, it's going to be harder for us, I would say, to get some of that Biden money. So whose fault is it, and what can we do?
This is a long-standing issue in New Hampshire, unfortunately, and we go back and forth rather rapidly in our political structure. But ultimately, over the last number of years, take the Volkswagen settlement money. I think it's just crazy that it's been sitting there doing nothing. There's not one single charger that has been built with that money. There were failed RFPs that came out of the Department of Environmental Services and Office of Strategic Initiatives, who are co-piloting this program, or at least trying to, and they're not doing a very good job of it. I think that there's just not the attention that needs to be paid to this. There's not the priority. And I think that's really the job of the citizenry, is to make sure that, political leaders are held accountable to make sure that these programs are carried out. There's no reason why we should be sitting here and that money is doing nothing. So, it's incumbent upon us to really hold feet to the fire, and that there are consequences for not doing it.
Okay. So if anyone has a question, you can, if we can see, you can either hit the chat button, and there's a little hand raiser thing, and not the chat button, the participant button. I think there's a place, I'm not quite sure where it is. Maybe Catherine, you can see it, where people can raise their hand.
It's under reactions, and you can see that I've raised my
Right.
hand there from that.
Okay, cool.
Bottom of your screen on the right is a little reactions thing. You
But
can
so
raise-
if you have any questions, you can raise your hand. So Catherine, do you have a question?
I was going to read from the chat, the first question that came up from Mark Longley for both Rob and Brianna, and it follows up a little bit with what you were asking, Len. What can we as individuals do now to make an impact on mitigating climate change, both locally and nationally?
Well, I mean, one of the, I guess, the opportunities that we have is that we have very short election cycles in New Hampshire where just everything, almost everything anyway, is on the ballot every 2 years. And, you know, we cannot ever lose sight of the fact that elections have consequences. And the fact that we have folks who don't care about these issues and are actually hostile to them, particularly in the House Science and Tech and Energy Committee, is a really big obstacle, makes a big difference. The Senate is a little more enlightened on these issues, and I have to give credit to Senator Bradley. I think he's trying to see what he can get done in this very difficult atmosphere, but the House is largely not a partner in these efforts at this time. So we have an election next year. We need to make sure that those legislators are folks that share our values and our priorities. And that's a, you know, one thing we have that opportunity for. But again, you have to be really vocal to your legislators. And it's not always easy because we are in a very ideologically driven period of time. It's very frustrating to those of us who try to work in a fact-based situation when facts don't always seem to matter. It's ideology. But we keep banging on the drum and we keep trying. But at the end of the day, you cannot underestimate the fact that who sits in any political decision-making position, whether it's local, state, or federal, that makes a difference. Because in the same way the personnel is policy and much of the sort of bureaucracy aspect, so it is for elected officials.
Next question is from Ginny Hurd. Or maybe it's Lisa that's asking the question. Go ahead and unmute, Lisa.
You might have to unmute. Oh, there she got it.
Okay, so you sort of touched on the answer to this question, but how at a national, the U.S. government is still giving huge subsidies to oil and coal companies. How do you have any suggestions other than winning elections of how to break this relationship?
So I
Go
can
ahead, Brianna.
just chime in. I think to that point, I think things are changing at a different level, and I think I just want to touch upon some of the larger industries and companies that are taking more of a stand on that, particularly from the investment community. You may be familiar with BlackRock, which is one of the largest investment holding companies. They've come out and said they're going to be taking climate issues into account when considering their investments. So I think when you mention another option besides winning elections, consider where your dollars are going and where you're investing, where you're purchasing, because that has significant value. That's a slightly larger scale, I know, than we'd all really prefer. But I think that's a big thing that we're starting to see from larger companies, and that support that traditionally has been there for fossil-based industries is starting to wane. Rob, I don't know if you want to chime in with anything else.
Well, yeah, just if you look at the, follow the money, the old saying goes, but if you look at the capitalization of where energy projects are going, the investments in renewable energy are dwarfing legacy fossil fuel investments all over the globe and in the United States as well. And you're seeing the cost of energy delivery by renewables, whether it's wind, solar, and other renewable sources, really undercutting legacy fossil fuel prices in much of the globe and here as well. And that, that market force is going to be really powerful, but it has to be coupled with incentives and enlightened policy at the local, state, and federal level to hasten that aspect. But I would say that, the market is our friend generally and largely in terms of the renewable energy revolution.
And on that point, is it possible, or would you be willing to send the Sandwich Climate Group a list of energy companies, like solar companies, both from New Hampshire or nationally, good companies to invest in?
I think I certainly have some access to that information as to, I can provide it.
That would be great. Thank you so much.
I just want to follow up on that a little bit. What about those of us who have some small investments, And so we deal with places like Fidelity or some of those other big companies. And I know at one point I talked to my broker about socially responsible investing. And he said, yeah, if you want to go do it, here's a place that'll do it somewhere else, because we're not going to deal with it, basically, which surprised me, because some of those things are doing well. So what message do we give to people in the financial field?
Well,
Yeah, that's a good question.
We have a New Hampshire company based right here, the Joe Keefe funds, Maxwell funds, which I actually have some investments in, truth be told, for truth in advertising. But it's not true. If somebody tells you that sustainable investment performance is somehow falling behind what you might think of traditional investment performance, it's just simply not true, borne out by the facts and data. So there are options, there are more options. Go ahead, Brianna, I'm sorry.
Oh, no problem. I just put the name into the chat.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Now I'm going to go to the Maggie Porter's Zoom, although I don't think that's Maggie.
Yeah, this is Boone Porter. I have a question, and then Maggie has a question right after me. A little while ago, we were talking about the settlement proceeds from Volkswagen that were just sitting there, not being utilized. And my question was, where is that money? Who's holding it? Because I assume large sums of money don't sit anywhere and not be used by somebody. Someone's using that money in the short term.
Right. So the Volkswagen settlement, the two agencies that are in charge of that are the Office of Strategic Initiatives. So they're the lead agency. They were the ones that developed what's called the Beneficiary Mitigation Plan, which they had to submit to Volkswagen in order to be approved for the funding. And they have been working with the Department of Environmental Services on actually expending that money. So both the 15% that I mentioned, the 4.6 million that's allocated for the electric vehicle supply equipment, and the other 85% that's allocated for vehicle replacement. It's my understanding that the funds that haven't been expended are held in a trust. It's not being held by state government. They have to submit something to the folks at Volkswagen saying, okay, here's our plan to spend the money. Here's actually where it's going to be going. Please release it to us so that we can submit it through grants or rebates or however they're planning to submit it. So it's not being held by state government, to my knowledge. It's being held off off in a different area with a trust. Is that your understanding as well, Rob?
Yes.
So basically Volkswagen's got the money now, or somebody acting under their direction.
Correct.
As a trustee.
Is that what
yeah,
you're saying?
supposedly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Did you have another question? Did you say Maggie had a question? Where'd he go? There he is.
He looks
I'm
like he's
sorry, you
frozen.
broke up. I didn't hear the answer.
Okay. Maggie, does she have a question?
Maggie have a question too?
I think we're breaking up. Maggie, did you have a question?
Hey,
Didn't hear anything
boom,
relating to the
boom.
climate coalition.
Yeah, turn your video off and it'll come in a little better, Maggie.
Okay. Sorry, Maggie. I don't know if she can hear.
We're going to work hard to get those broadband dollars up to you.
Oh
people.
God, we
You
need it.
Need it.
Raise
So-
your hand again, Maggie, if you do get better service. I'm going to go to Ron and Peggy.
Okay, the question I have here is what the responsibility does the governor have in ensuring that these energy-related funds should be spent? Essentially,
I-
should we be in touch with Chris Sununu to say, why do we have all these unspent funds and who is the responsibility? Does that, some of that reside in the governor's office?
So yes and no. So in regards to the Volkswagen settlement, the Office of Strategic Initiatives, the governor was the one who directed them to manage that fund, and the governor appoints the members of staff of that agency. So he appointed the director, the assistant director, the energy policy manager. So in that regard, he definitely has a direct line to influence whether or not that money is spent. He also is the one who fully directed 15% of those funds to go towards the electric vehicle supply equipment. So in that sense as well, he has shown that he is aware of that fund and is invested, for lack of a better term, in its uses. When it comes to some of the other funds, like the Renewable Energy Fund, that's managed by the Public Utilities Commission. They're the only state agency that is approved to grant rebates. No other state agency can give rebates like they can. That is not really directly under the governor's say. That fund was established in statute and it's managed by the agency. He does appoint the commissioners of the Public Utilities Commission, and one could argue that they do have some sway over how quickly things happen there. There was a big delay this year in getting those, even just the budgets for the Renewable Energy Fund released. So you could argue that maybe he has some sway over the speed with which the commission makes some decisions regarding those funds. And then that also relates to the energy efficiency funding that I mentioned earlier. Right now, there are only 2 commissioners where there's supposed to be 3 at the Public Utilities Commission. There's been a vacancy, I want to say, for about 9 months or maybe a little bit more. And there is some, I guess, some theories that the delay in approving those funds to go out has been because the 2 commissioners are deadlocked, and that there's not a third to break a tie as to whether or not to approve the plan. The governor has nominated a new commissioner, so we should be seeing him. He's actually supposed to be interviewed, I believe, this Wednesday by the Executive Council. And I believe at the meeting following, he will have the opportunity to be confirmed. So that might be an option to see those funds get kickstarted. But that's what I know for those 3 funds, for the Volkswagen settlement, the Renewable Energy Fund, and the Energy Efficiency Plan.
Yeah,
Since
real
we're-
quick, I would say for the Volkswagen Fund, this is where leadership can matter. If the governor wants this done and wants it done by a date certain, he can weigh in and make sure it gets done. So that's, of those funds, that's certainly, I think, the clearest path and example where he could actually move it ahead.
So I have a quick question before, because since we're on this topic, can the two of you put together kind of an action plan that people like us can then institute? For example, putting pressure on the PUC, or putting pressure on the strategic trust fund or the governor. So, because otherwise, I mean, I can see that happening, but it would really be nice if there was sort of a strategic plan that not only we would be doing, but could grow. There's people in Plymouth listening in, but we could bring the whole state in or parts of the whole state in. And it would be really nice to see that kind of very well spelled out action plan, I believe.
Okay. So you need that question answered by
Either
Brianna?
one, can it happen?
Well,
Yes, it certainly
Brianna?
can happen. I mean,
Will
that's
you do
part
it?
of, part of what we do
Yeah.
in my organization is organizing actions. A lot of folks have, we have been organizing folks to call senators around particular bills. Certainly the net metering, you've been very active in that in terms of getting our members to call their legislators. There's no reason why an action plan that as the type that you described couldn't be developed and replicated.
Well, if you could do it and send it to us, that would be fantastic.
I'll say too, at Clean Energy New Hampshire, we send out a weekly policy update to everyone that's on that list. And that includes information on bills that have hearings, special action alerts, opportunities for folks to contact their legislators, similar to what Rob mentioned. So if anyone's interested in that, I'm happy to add them to that list too.
Yeah, and that's good, but sometimes it would be nice if it was targeted, but I don't want to take up more
Sure.
time. So there's other people with their hands up, but yeah. All right, thanks.
So Brianna is going to have to sign off at 7:30. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Wayne King is up with a question. Wayne, you
Well,
wanna go ahead?
unless Brianna is going to be here for a few minutes more, I don't have a question. No offense, Rob. Rob and I are old buddies.
Yeah, we're old Mowgli buddies on Newfound Lake.
What was your question?
I
what was your-
think
Maybe I could answer.
Well, I'm a little bit tongue-tied here. Last week, I interviewed Don Crease for my podcast, and he was talking about a PUC order that everybody had agreed to, and then all of a sudden, Eversource had backed off. It had to do with energy efficiency, but I don't know all the details, and I was going to follow up with him this week to figure out how I could help advocate for it. But
Well,
do you know
that's the triennial energy plan that I believe that Brianna was talking about, that all the parties, utilities, and others agreed to last year,
Right.
which would really ramp up energy efficiency funds. And this is what stuck. And there's a lot of political theater around it in some ways. So you've got these, speculation of the PUC commissioners being deadlocked. We don't know whether this third commissioner is going to be an ally or a foe in terms of making that happen or not in terms of the next vote or the tie vote, if that is in fact the case. The other aspect that you might remember is that at the beginning of the legislative session, Representative Vose, the chair of the House Science, Tech, and Energy Committee, then Speaker Hinch, Representative Michael Harrington, also on the ST&E committee, they penned a letter to the PUC basically saying that in this time of pandemic, these energy efficiency programs need to be funded or need to be halted because they're funded through something called the systems benefit charge, which is we all pay. And it's not a lot of money, but collectively it is a lot of money. For the individual, it's not a lot of money. So you've got that. You've got also the other aspect of speculation is the proposal for a new energy department, and how does that fold in how does that affect the PUC? So I think one thing that Don Crease has said in print, and I'm not sure if he said this in your podcast, but he has been very critical of what he sees as political interference in the PUC dockets in this particular case. And I can tell you in Concord, you know, we launched our Weatherized Concord program in mid-March. And we now have close to 50 folks that are customers of Liberty Utilities because they did suspend the program in Concord and around the state that are frozen because of this inaction of the PUC. It is largely at their doorstep as to why the program is suspended. And again, it's just, I'm sorry to say, just another in a long line of very poor policy choices by regulators and legislators.
So when you say this energy efficiency, is this New Hampshire Saves button up?
Yes.
Or is it, this is
Yes, New
it?
Hampshire Saves.
This is exactly what you're talking about. Okay.
Exactly what I'm talking about. There's a lot of money out there, or supposed to be, over the next 3 years. And because of the inaction of the PUC, it's causing a lot of issues. So we launched our program with a lot of promise in Concord, but now we have a wait list.
Well, have they halted the collection of those funds by the utility companies?
Not to my knowledge, because they anticipate that this roadblock will eventually be lifted this later this year. But so, I mean, the point is that the money is there. The process is broken down, unfortunately.
But I think you should re-emphasize that is our money. So we're paying, when you pay your electric bill, they take a little piece of your electric bill for this New Hampshire Saves thing, and
Right.
they're not reinvesting your money that every one of us are putting in, correct?
Well, that's correct. And here, back to the unfortunate political aspect of this, and I agree with Don Kreis of political interference, and the legislature taking signals that, oh, you know, this system benefit charge is somehow going to be an economic burden to business, which is really a bit ridiculous given the fact of its impact on a, you know, business budget when in the scheme of all things. It's just, it's unfortunate. It's the old saying of, you know, being penny wise and pound foolish. It really is a good example of that.
Question is from Maggie Porter.
I just had a quick question. I don't know a lot about the Climate Coalition. I, read about it every now and then on the sandwich board, but I don't read very much about nuclear power. And I'm wondering if that's something that is addressed, because I think over half of our energy in New Hampshire is generated by nuclear. So are you for, against, ambivalent?
Well, I suppose in some ways I'm agnostic. The reason I say that is because, as you point out, in the whole 6 New England grid, a source like, Seabrook is really important. But that's why you take offshore wind. The goal for New England is to have 30 gigawatts of at least procurement of offshore wind for New England alone by 2030, or I'm sorry, 2025, sooner than that, because that really is our biggest lever, as I said, because you have to get to a point where you need reliable energy. It needs to be there all the time. Battery storage is coming along, but that's going to take a while, but it's very promising. You need to get to a situation where there's enough of a energy mix around and reliability of alternative energy where in the future, you're not going to need a Seabrook nuclear power plant, or you're not going to need the Bow, the coal plant, the Merrimack coal plant in Bow. Obviously that doesn't run very often. We don't want it to run at all. We need to get to that situation. So
Just so people know, the Bow plant only comes on usually in winter when so much natural gas is being used that they need another source of energy. So that thing sits there, but you're paying a big chunk of your
that's
bill
correct.
for that thing to sit there. Probably
On standby.
pretty much almost 50 weeks out of the year, maybe 2 weeks it runs.
Well,
right?
sometimes
I'm
in
not
the
sure.
summer it runs when we're all, running conditioners. But you're right, it sits there, 80% of the time.
Can I just say one thing? That was a great question, Maggie, because there is no place to put nuclear waste. There is no place to put nuclear waste. Period. Thank you.
Right. Some people want to put it all in Nevada. That didn't work out very well politically.
No, that's right.
So,
Okay, so I have a question of my own. One exciting development is Biden is calling up the Conservation Corps. It may have a
Yes.
new name. Was that the old name and there's a new one? But can you tell us, what are they going to be doing in relation to climate change?
Well, I think one of the things that, as I understand it, and frankly, I want to dig a bit more into this particular proposal, but it's a way to engage people and get them all bought in to our all of society approach that we have to have for these issues, and this one in particular. So I think that there's a lot of work to be done on the local level around, energy development, research, education, those kinds of things. So, frankly, I wish I knew a bit more about what their plan of work is going to be. I know that it'll be of value. But you know what, I can find some resources and send them your way on this question.
Thank you.
It's going to be a civilian climate corps. So in the
Yeah.
past, there was the, civilian conservation corps. And so it's going to maybe be built on that. And, the old CCC recruited thousands of young kids who were out of work during the Depression. And that was one of the most popular programs. So they're hoping to have something similar to that. I'm not sure if they will be out
Well, I
actually
think
doing physical work or might.
Yeah, I think one of the things that sparks in you, as you say, is that you take weatherization, for example. In order to actually weatherize the amount of homes that we need to, you're going to need personnel. We do have even here in New Hampshire with the New Hampshire States program, there's a workforce issue there. You can train folks to do this work. And I think as you were talking, it occurred to me that I believe that weatherization is something that, is really practical and needs a lot of people. And so that could be, part of their plan. And I believe that it is actually.
Peggy Longley has a question. With the passage of House Bill 373 in the House for the gag rule blocking not only planning for reducing carbon in the atmosphere, but not even discussion unless approved by Sununu. Do you think the Senate will block it? We in Sandwich have been writing to Jeb Bradley.
Well, I think that's the best thing you can do is talk to Jeb Bradley and talk to Senator Avard. And certainly, and on top of that, I would talk to Chuck Morris, the Senate president from Salem. I think those three in the Senate, I think would have some sway. Obviously, Senator Avard from Nashua is the chair of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. Senator Bradley, people listen to him on these issues. They consider him to be well-schooled on energy issues, which he is. So I think you really need to get to Jeb Bradley and convince him that this is bad for the state. And I think that's I would be optimistic about that. I think that the Senate is acting quite differently than the House at this juncture. With the state budget, you can tell that the governor is not happy with the House budget. He is expecting the Senate to be a little more sensible in his mind on a number of things, and this could be one of them. So,
on a related topic, from Diana Witt, She wants to know ways that we might be able to pressure Sununu and the GOP legislator to release money already allocated, and how to pressure lawmakers to release Biden's allocated funds so that the foot dragging can stop.
Well, I think we talked about this before, and it's something that Len had brought up. There is a way to put together a plan where you have a lot of people making a lot of noise to get some attention. And we know that if it's targeted, it can have an effect. It's worth the effort. I think the caution that I sometimes have is that among some legislators, they see the world through such an ideological lens that it doesn't necessarily matter to them who they hear from, if they have their mind made up. But we know that we're in a point in our history where there's a lot of that we have to push against. But that doesn't mean that you can't find some key legislators that can make a difference and we need to make some noise. I think that's really the bottom line.
Well, it's just about 4:45 now, unless anybody has a really pressing question they'd like to ask. So I don't see any hands up. So Rob, thank you very, very much for doing this. And Brianna, you're not here, but I would like to thank you too. This has been a really interesting, I learned a lot from this particular discussion. I think we all did. And it would really, if we could come up with some sort of direct action plan that might, maybe there's 5 legislators out there who are sort of worried about their position enough that if we really go after them, or 5 senators, that's all you need is 5 senators, I guess, on the Republican side. And that sounds easier, I guess, than this to do. But anyhow, if you come up with some sort of direct action plan for us, I will make sure it gets distributed to this group, and I'm sure some of the people from over in Plymouth will make sure it gets distributed to their group, and maybe we can kick some butt.
I certainly can help you with that. It seems to me that the most direct thing we could do around funding is the VW funds, and the fact that it's shameful they've been sitting there used for this long. So I think we should make some noise about that.
Well, I see the VW thing, but also that, we're putting our money into, to Eversource or
Right, the
New Hampshire Electric Co-op, and,
Right.
it's sitting there.
Right.
What the heck?
Right. I think those are probably the 2 things. You mentioned another good one that could lend itself to, that's really timely. It'll be interesting to see on the federal side in terms of the infrastructure on EVs. As I said, this is a grant-making authority or opportunity. Grants will be made to states to build out this infrastructure.
Well,
unfortunately, in New Hampshire, we have a history of not taking federal money. And so we need to make sure that doesn't happen.
Well, but if it does happen, the last time it went directly to the governor, and he
Right.
decided who gets it. Nobody except him decides who gets the money. And so, I don't think the Biden people are going to fall into that trap, but who knows?
Something incredible.